My name is John Nelson. I live and work here in the glorious state of Michigan, the best state in the Union, of course. And I live in a town called Grand Ledge, just outside of a town called Grand Ledge. It's near Lansing, just west of Lansing, actually. Uh, I do a lot of different things for Esri. I work on a team called the Living Atlas team. And what that is, it's kind of like Wikipedia for content. Customers can upload data and maps that they've made if they want to help disseminate that content to folks. And they can also use the stuff that's there. So it's available to everybody, kind of like a sharing platform of data and maps and that kind of thing. And it's great. I love it. It's just the best. My role is a little bit nebulous in that I'll look for opportunities to use that data and promote the fact that it's there and do weird stuff with it and make maps. So long as I show people how to make those maps, which is cool with me because that's my favorite part. I can have a lot of fun making a map, but then I have mega fun writing the how-to for that and sharing the steps and actually whittling down the weird, meandering, circuitous process of making that map into something that's actually useful and concise for folks. It's really rewarding, satisfying, and fun. I got it made.
That's awesome. I feel like every time I go on LinkedIn or search any email from Esri, your face and name is there somewhere.
Sorry.
So good job with that. So if can you kind of start from the beginning? Where'd you grow up? Where did you go to school at college?
Yeah.
What degree you got?
Yeah. So I'm a Michigan person. I grew up in Mount Pleasant, Michigan. My dad was a professor for 40 years at Central Michigan University, and my mom was an art teacher and a middle school history teacher. She taught me Michigan history. She was my art teacher. And so I went to Central Michigan for my undergrad and actually went back to Central Michigan for my master's degree when that program opened up, which was a lot of fun for me. I loved it. I pretty much grew up on the campus of CMU, so it means a lot to me. It's a big part of the Nelson family. My sister's a professor there, actually, in the child development department. I don't know if they call it that anymore, but that's what she does. Yeah, so I got my undergrad there, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to major in. My father taught in the geography department, and so I think a lot of by default I would just take classes there because I was familiar with them. But I was also taking art classes, and I ended up in an introduction to cartography class or introduction to GIS. Back then they called it computerized cartography. And I remember sitting down for a lab and everything. When I went to college, I had to ask the computer lab how to turn the computer on because I was totally illiterate, technical, machine wise. We didn't have a computer at home. And I'm terrified in this class. I'm like pushing these buttons really nervously and hesitantly, like in this tutorial, like, man, I don't want to screw anything up and get it wrong. It was a really scary experience. And I think of that and it helps kind of guide me in trying to brew some recklessness into folks when it comes to button pushing or casting off the notion of button pushing. But you have to build up some confidence in button pushing. So I was there and we had to make a dot density map. And I saw the dot density map like come to life, sprinkle in all those dots load. I feel like anybody who's been in a GIS class remembers that first dot density map where you just watch them sprinkle, and you look at it for 3.5 hours while it renders on your screen. You're like, this is magic. I thought it was great. And that was it. So I majored in GIS stuff. They called it the techniques, but it was geography, concentration in GIS. And I minored in art, which was a lot of fun because a lot of the same topics were covered completely differently. I'm in this photography class and they're talking about composition and filters to get to block out UV and push the film into infrared a little bit and dodging and burning and creating this vignette. And then I would just take that right into the cartography class. And I would hear similar things in the cartography class, but from a totally different angle, like the properties of light and the wavelengths and filtering out this and that to get crisp satellite imagery and that kind of stuff. So it was this bizarre, like two sides of the same coin. You got these our professors with berets talking about the same thing as these GIS professors with their zip up fleece vests and their hiking boots. But it was the same kind of stuff from two different angles. And I think that was really influential and frankly a lot of fun and bizarre for a kid to be like, man, this is the same stuff. I don't know if they realize this. But so that was college.
And that was at Central? And
yeah,
then
Central.
Moving from Central, what did you do from there?
Well, I got a part-time job for the water department in Mount Pleasant, getting the GPS positions of the water services for all the houses in town. Before that, their system of record was a filing cabinet with note cards on it, and they would kind of look up the address, look up the address, and they would see this written description of where to find the underground valve to turn the water on and off, connecting the house to the water line.
How many years ago was this?
This was 2000. Yeah, the year 2000.
Many communities still have filing cabinets of little 3x5 tab cards that we're still trying to get them to GPS and catalog that.
Yeah. So, I mean, like go to the oak tree, it's 32 paces east and, 12 steps north from the corner of the sidewalk, that kind of thing. But they were moving on from that. I'll tell you, I got like weird looks and kind of blowback and like passive aggressive, like we don't need the, I got your locations right here. And some of the old timers would point to their mind, like it's all up here. And I didn't really know how to defend the fact that GIS was a good thing and valuable back then, but I would just kind of smile and go, yeah, that's great. But in my head, I was thinking, yeah, but what happens when you retire? How are you going to do a buffer query on note cards in a filing cabinet? And so I cranked out just a ton of water service points. That was a fun summer. I had the little X-ray headphones on, the little wand, looking for the metal, and then I'd flag it and spray the curb and hit it with the Trimble GPS unit. And it was kind of fun because a bunch of the houses that I was working out in front of, the homeowner would saunter out and go, what are they going to do now? Because it looked like a Miss Dig situation where, they were going to get some construction out front. And so I got to tell them what I was doing.
And then so from the water department, kind of where did your career evolve to? What other jobs did you do? What's the evolution to Esri?
Well, I eventually, so I did that, and eventually I got a job out in Massachusetts on a little island called Martha's Vineyard. It happened to be like the only full-time job that I got. I sent my application out to hundreds of places, got nothing. Turns out I was spelling attachment wrong in my email. I may have had something to do with it. But that was a real drag, like not having, because all through school, they're like, this is the greatest field and there's so much market opportunity because they've got to sell it to kids. They've got to sell the program. But I didn't get a job. It was a couple of months and I felt like a real loser, but I eventually landed that job, which was such a relief because I'd just been married. We had a baby on the way and we needed insurance. It was terrifying. And so I was so happy to get that job. But we had to move halfway across the country to a little island with no bridge and leave everybody behind. And we're, pretty young.
Out of all the islands to settle on, Martha's Vineyard is a pretty good one, I might say.
Well, yeah, in some ways, but in other ways, it's like the worst. So it was literally the most expensive place in the country to live. I looked that up later when I was doing a income to house cost ratio, and Martha's Vineyard was the worst. And we couldn't find any place to live. And, we rented there. And so naturally we stayed there for a year and we left, but it was a good year. My son was born there. And so he's technically an islander, which means a lot to those people, which is kind of interesting. And I worked for the natural resources department of a Native American tribe there. It was really interesting, but I'll tell you, it was hard at first because I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing. There was no assignments. I didn't land there and they're like, all right, we got you all set up for, this onboarding process and these tasks, and we want you to do this and that. I was just kind of sitting there. And I'll tell you, it can be stressful to have too much to do, but when you're brand new, especially like brand new into the workforce, not knowing what to do and feeling like you're not adding value, and you're like, oh my gosh, they're going to fire me. They're going to see through that I'm a fraud and I don't really do it. That is really stressful, is feeling like you don't have enough to do. And I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing. And I've told this story a few times, so maybe some people have told it, but I asked a ranger, I was like, hey, what do you think what should I do? He was a little taken aback. And he says, well, he thought about it for a second. He goes, well, why don't you make a map? And he kind of looked at me, make a map. I was like, oh, okay. So something kind of clicked then. I was like, all right, I'll just stay busy. I'll make maps. It's just, so I thought of ways to make maps and topics and went to it. And I'll tell you, the terrifying experience of having to figure out what to do to keep yourself busy kind of set the tone for all my jobs after that. You'll always have things to do, especially once you get more comfortable in a job, but it's really important to keep in mind that geography people are hired because of our brains. We're not button pushers. We're not stenographers. We're not tool appliers. We're thinkers. We're creative people who can solve problems. And it's important to remember that. And if you see an opportunity to solve a problem, go ahead and do it. If you hear about some data, go ask for it and then make a map out of it and blow people's minds. If you do something that somebody didn't ask you to do, they're going to think it's like you're a superhero. Like, look at this. I've never seen this before. You can do this. And then they'll send you some more maps or some more data to make maps out of. Can you do this? Yeah, I can do that. And you'll advance a lot.
Speaking of the data, on the island, I mean, did they have much data, or were you developing your own and just coming up with ways to make maps? I mean, there would have been a target for what you were trying to analyze or map, right?
Yeah. So I decided to make like a baseline. Remember Macromedia Flash? You remember the Flash days when a stooge like me who can't program could make this amazing multimedia interactive immersive map experience? Like, here we are 20 years later and you can't come close to anything like that. It's ridiculous. Thanks, Steve Jobs. Yeah, I made a flash map of their tribal lands and like a photo gallery with each place, and you could explore it and that kind of thing. And another thing I did was I took the $10,000 Trimble GPS pack unit out and mapped their coastline, which is a clay cliff that erodes pretty significantly from time to time with various storms. And so I mapped that, thinking it'd be kind of cool to have an annual coastline geographic census to see how that changes. And it was just nice to get outside, Have
you ever looked back and try to make a new version of your cool maps and blogs based on the island or anything like that, using historical imagery or kind of replicating what you did back in the day?
Well, what I was just recently thinking about missed opportunities there. I could have done so much more and better, more interesting things in hindsight. I would have really liked to have done a geographic collection of place names in the native language. Like, what do you call this place? What did your grandparents call it? Because they were re-establishing their written language and working with professors to reestablish that written language, and they're teaching the kids the language, which is this wonderful thing. And I wished I could have done a gazetteer of their place names and not in, the American English version of those place names. I should have done an atlas of their island locations and their place names. That would have been amazing, with little audio clips and things to see how somebody would pronounce it.
Well,
that
you
would have been
still
awesome.
can, John, and that would be awesome. And I would certainly click it and read it.
Somebody could do that.
All right. So after the island, what happened? Where did you go? What did you do?
While I was on the island, Central Michigan University fired up their grad program for GIS, and I applied. So my future on the island wasn't, I'd look into the future and be like, well, am I going to buy a $400,000 tear down shed to buy? I'll never
been worth millions nowadays.
I felt like there was no future. Yeah. And it probably would have been a good deal. Hindsight, I should have tried. I should have gone for it. Not that I could have ever paid it off. So I went back to Central Michigan. I was there for a little over a year. I went back to Central for a master's degree, and that was great. Loved it. Such a good program, good people. Learned a ton. The cool thing about a master's degree is you spend so much time in your undergraduate degree figuring things out and taking these survey classes and learning the definitions of things and getting experience with this new world of concepts and topics, whatever your program of study. But then you kind of know that stuff for a master's degree. And a master's degree is this great opportunity to start thinking critically about it and learning how to ask better questions. Instead of receiving information, you're at the point of, okay, you can process information and then start asking critical questions about your program of study. Asking better questions is where it's at. That's where the real fun was. So I had a blast with that. That was a great program. I was there for 2 years. And once again, after I graduated, I was unemployed for a number of months and felt terrible. Total loser. I'm not valuable. Nobody's hiring me, that kind of thing. Man, that was rough. But, stuff happens. I just had to be more patient. It's hard to be patient, though, when you've got a little family and financial needs and you feel like you're not providing for them. That was bleak, but things turn around. Had an old friend from grad school, old classmate named Joe Gilberg, an old friend, not old friend. I mean, I just gone to school with him a couple months prior. I said, "What are you doing?" I can't find anything. He said, "Oh, I'm working in this little software company in Lansing and it's great." And so I looked him up and they're doing exactly the kind of stuff that I was doing, like for fun in my in-laws' basement while I waited for nobody to return my applications. They were an interactive mapping and data viz company, like a little startup. And they were doing like vector maps on the web, mixing raster tiles and building this map viewer and presenting data. And this is like pre-Google Maps. And I saw this, and this is the kind of stuff that I was like digging and doing for fun, and that I was doing for the Native American tribe in my previous job, and that I had kind of done for fun in grad school, a couple projects that I'd done for fun, interactive maps in Flash. And I was like, yes, this is amazing. So I sent them an email saying, hey, I'm a friend of Joe's, and here are some things that I've made that I could, email them as attachments. Back then, they were small enough I could send them. And
you spell it right this time?
I doubt it. I don't know if I learned my lesson. Who knows? But I was in there the next day. So I had an interview with them the next day. They're like, get in here, because I was able to share them stuff that I had done, which is really strong advice that I give students, is have an online portfolio. Because, if somebody's looking at a big stack of resume, somebody who can actually show them things, that's what's going to stick in their heads. Like, oh, they're the ones who did this map or this analysis. That's where it's at. So, I mean, a portfolio is so much more important than a resume, even though a resume is kind of what gets you in. The portfolio is what gets you the job.
I agree with you there, as one that reviews a lot of resumes for my positions. Having just a resume itself isn't the best. It doesn't stand out. You're right. Having a link to a story map of all your maps, or your own blog with all your sources there, linking to your LinkedIn is another one. Having that there, having a presence is huge. But what you touched on was that connection, saying you knew that guy. That also helped. Connections are key too.
Yeah, for sure. And when I talk to students, I say, especially once we were about to graduate, I'm like, look around at everybody in this class. They're all in the same boat as you. Some of them already have jobs as sons of guns. And they're exactly the sort of network that you're going to want and need going forward. And also look at your professors. These professors have graduated generations of students doing exactly the job that you're trying to do. And they know where, who have kept in contact with them. They know where they've gotten jobs, and they've got this intrinsic sense of a network for employment. So keep in touch with professors and be friendly with them and conversational, and give them email updates, and things can happen. But the online portfolio, if I'm just looking at a resume and there's no links to anything that they've done, A, it's not going to stand out in my mind. But B, I want to see that you're intrinsically motivated and that you're a maker and that you get things done and you can point to results. You know what I mean? Like, show me something. Show me something. That means like you're going to do cool things.
Especially with the power of, this, again, story maps and your own hosting your content through college. I mean, it's different than 20 years ago when you had to create your own website and host that. And,
Yeah.
the research is so much easier now to keep and present. And the smallest little map that you make in a grad class or your senior year or whatever it is, it's better than nothing.
Yeah,
Proud of it.
exactly. Yeah. There's so many opportunities to pretty easily share your content online, especially now. It is easier.
So you got that position then with that company in Lansing?
I did. Yeah. I was there for,
What was the name of the company?
almost 12 years. It was called IDV Solutions in Lansing, IDV Solutions. And its purpose sort of evolved over time, as a small tech company in Michigan does. You go where the money is and you go where the customers are. Started out kind of broad. We would do projects for companies, helping them visualize their data, and every project was different. That was a thrill. I loved it. And then over time, you solve the same sorts of problems over and over again, and you had a template. And so we were able to build actually a product around that. It's a consistent set of user requirements. And so we'd build a product and sell them the product, and then maybe some customizations on top of that. And then over time, our customer base got more and more specific to, after like 10 years, 8, 9, 10 years, to physical security, which frankly for me stopped being all that interesting. You get this. We used to solve a lot of different problems for different folks, financial institutions, police organizations, nonprofits, that sort of thing, like really different problems. And then over time, it just became, like, well, you have a door unlocked alarm, an open window alarm, and here's where you station your security guards, and here's the path. And I get those things are important, but it became a lot less interesting over time. Like it's the same thing over and over again.
So what happened next in the story of John?
Well, I asked if I could go to the NACIS conference. NACIS, NACIS, is a conference of map makers, map nerds, good folks. And I had been to a few before, and I was like, okay, we're going to go this year. And they're like, no, we're not going to send you to that conference. But we will send you to like a security guard conference. And I was like, oh man, and I knew the writing was on the wall, but that kind of sealed it for me. And I was like, are you sure? You sure? No, we're sure. This is a good conference, a security guard conference. Okay. And I was very uninspired. I was unhappy in my work. And I was interviewing in places, and I was seriously considering opportunities that would have been like a 20% pay cut and an hour's commute. And I'm like, what am I doing? Why don't I like throw a Hail Mary and see if Esri's hiring? And I always thought of Esri as a big, scary competitor. Honestly, it was like they were the big bad guys when I worked at my previous job, because we would compete against them for so many years for jobs. And how
many years ago was this when you were looking at that?
I've been at Esri for 6 years now. So this was 6 years ago. And I sent Ken Field, who I'd become friendly with on Twitter. By the way, the mapping community on Twitter is great. Good folks. People share their work and they share how-tos, and they're just very encouraging. And I love it. I recommend people to check that out. And so that's how I, got familiar with people in the mapping community, other actual names. These people are doing the same kind of things I'm doing. I didn't know that this was like a thing. And so I sent Ken an email, said, hey, Ken, I don't know if Esri's hiring, but if you ever see a job that looks like it might be remotely a good fit for a guy like me, maybe send the link my way. And Ken's a good friend, and now he's a really good friend. And he took that resume and he just pushed it all over the places and put it in front of hiring directors and stuff. And I owe so much to Ken for that. And it was right before the user conference. And so everything at Esri kind of like gets singularly focused. This is the user conference. And then for like 2 weeks, everybody's on vacation after that. And so it's like a month-long black hole where people just are going to be hard to really wrangle at Esri. I didn't really realize that then. And so after that was over, I flew out for a 2-day interview, it would have been super stressful, except that, and I'll admit this, I assumed I wasn't going to take the job. For some reason in the back of my head, I wasn't really ready to really want to work somewhere else. And so I didn't take it totally seriously. So I was I was like, I shouldn't even go. And Danielle said, well, why don't you just go out there and hear them out? Why not just hear them out? Big deal. I was like, okay. So I flew out there thinking, wow, I'm not really going to take this seriously, but I'll see what the experience is. It would be kind of interesting.
Did you think you were going to have to move out there?
No. So I have commitments here, especially like to my father who's 80. I can't move. It wasn't an option for me. And I was really upfront with them right off the bat about that. I can't move out there. I would have to be remote, but I'll be the best, remote person you've ever seen. And so I got there, and it's kind of ironic. Like my attitude was very relaxed and casual because I wasn't terribly interested in accepting a job if they were going to offer it, if you can believe it. And so I was just really relaxed in the interviews, and I think that really worked. I wasn't like, I need this. I just assumed I wasn't going to take it, but I was just hearing them out, and I think.
And you got a free trip to California, right?
Ironically, yeah. And then they did make an offer, and I was like, well, maybe I should I like negotiate with them and like think about taking it? And Daniel was like, yeah, why would you not? You're like interviewing with these terrible positions here. Why wouldn't you like take this seriously? I was like, I guess. So I did. And man, am I happy. I love it. And so I landed in the content team, Living Atlas team, but immediately I was on loan to the Story Maps team because the Story Maps team had just lost a user experience designer. And that was what I did at my previous job, IDV Solutions, is user experience design, like just thinking from the beginning all the way through how an interactive map could be and could look. And so it's just a ton of UX experience. I don't have any formal training in UX. It's all just intuition and experience, but I think that's the good stuff anyway. And so I worked on the Story Maps team for the first year I was here because they were working on a new story map template called Cascade, which is like the long form scrolly telling. The word is scrolly telling, that format. So I got to work with them on that user experience, the builder. I mean, the experience for the viewer is just a tiny fraction of all the effort that goes into building. Well, how do you build an experience to make somebody build their experience, like a meta?
So did you help come up with the idea and the style, and then you had developers behind the scenes kind of coding that and building that for you?
Yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic, very democratic. I mean, Alan Carroll headed up the team, and he was like the head of mapping for National Geographic. So initially I was really starstruck. But yeah, there's an architect, and there are kind of neat team of folks, and we would all throw ideas out, and a lot of the ideas I would have, but I would have to mock them up, create little interactive mock-ups or PowerPoint, things and whiteboard sessions and stuff like that, and then work with the developers and give them assets, design, buttons, and come up with the specs for that kind of stuff. It was a blast. It was a ton of work, but it was a lot of fun. And it was the sort of thing I was used to. So maybe in a lot of ways, it was a nice onboarding into Esri, because if I just landed in the role that I'm doing right now, which is like maybe 25% UX work and 75% ad hoc map making and writing, teaching kind of stuff, it would be a bigger jolt for me. So working with the Story Maps team was kind of a closer sort of job that I had been doing previously, doing UX design stuff.
When you just touched on, the percentage breakdown, kind of the UX, and then you kind of glossed over the ad hoc kind of mapping, blogging, teaching portion.
Yeah.
How did you step into the MOOC world and teaching and, being one of the leaders there? Did you just come naturally, or did they ask you and you're like, I guess, or like, were you like, oh, that's awesome, I want to do that? Because every cartography MOOC and anything to do with map making, I mean, your name is front and center, and you're running the show. How did you step into that? Was that nerve-wracking to you, or did you just like it because of your schooling and your upbringing? Or
I can't shut up about it, and so it's going to fall out of me one way or another. A maker is going to have to make, and then I like talking about that making process. And I have a blog, Adventures in Mapping, that I've been doing all along, that transitioned over to after leaving IDV Solutions. So I was a pretty active blogger at IDV Solutions. And so I had experience there, for about 6 years, I'd been blogging at IDV, and then I was blogging on my own after I left. And then my manager, Sean Breyer, said, well, maybe you should write some blogs for Esri's blog. And I was like, yeah, I guess I could. That's cool. That'll be exciting. It was kind of intimidating. Like, really? Esri's, this is official and fancy. I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, but he's asking me to. And so I got permission to post things there. I got some fool opened the gate for me. So I got in there and I started blogging in Esri's blog. And the funny thing about sharing maps and sharing the workflow to make maps is it results in more maps. It's like this weird snowball where if I don't make a map and blog about it after a while, I start running thin on ideas. It's this weird kind of nuclear engine where you just keep feeding it and it gets bigger and bigger. As I'm making
fascinating to me, because most people are guarded with, they come up with a cool way or a cool app design layout and they want to keep it to themselves and not share it at conferences or meetings or on LinkedIn. And I'm the opposite. I want to show off all the cool work that we're doing and how we did it. And especially seeing how you do that, that's, it's inspiring because you're like, oh, wow, we can do it like this. And he's showing us how to do it. That's awesome. Like, I wish more people did that. So I want to give you kudos for that, 'cause I enjoy reading them.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I can see the initial hesitancy if you're in a private sector and you're maybe a smaller shark and you don't want people to pirate your ideas. But it's going to happen. And I feel like a more radical version of transparency is better because it's going to make you more productive and more generous in the process. And people are going to be more generous with you. And you're going to open yourself up to this realm of map nerds who want to share and help. And that totally rules. So I get the sense that you might want to be a little bit more closed and secretive, but also people are going to innovate. The only way to stay ahead is just to keep innovating, just to keep coming up with weird ways of doing things, new ways of doing things, hacks to existing workflows. You just got to keep moving, keep swimming ahead. Otherwise, if you just guard your cool idea, it's not going to be that cool in a year and a half. It's not going to be new and novel in a year and a half. You got to keep moving, keep innovating. It's the only way.
So with back to the teaching portion, once they open that up, I'm guessing you're with the training team talking ideas and things to show and classes to put out. Like, do you have a lot of input in how you want to tailor that, or is it up to you and what you want to present with the other speakers?
I don't have a typical role at Esri. There is a training team and they do really great work. And I just worked with them recently, kind of for the first time in coming up with, they call it a learn lesson, which is like this very formatted template of a lesson. And they translate it in like 6 languages, which is weird to think that things I might write get translated into different languages. But it's really kind of open-ended. And the blog is a really nice venue for that because it's open-ended. Oh, I got an idea. 2.5 hours later, there's a blog post out there. And there's not a lot of permission or gates that a person has to go through, which, by the way, this is professional advice I give to people. I think many of our roles have so much more freedom than we ascribe to it, than we give it credit for. If you take some of that freedom and go with it, nothing bad is going to happen. You don't necessarily have to ask permission for everything. I think a lot of the times a manager just wants somebody who's energetic and is going to go out there and do things and solve problems. And you want to give your manager a heads up once in a while and keep them in the loop. But you also don't want to be like that guy building cabinets on Seinfeld who asks Jerry a question for every little detail and nuance. What size screw should I use, Jerry? Just do it. You know what I mean? So there's a lot more freedom in our roles than we might assume. And once you kind of harness that and run with it, it's so fun, so much more fun than just kind of waiting to be told what to do or asking to be told what to do. And I feel like I halfway answered your question, but now I've forgotten what the question was. So here we are.
We're good. With all your blogs and articles, how do you draw that inspiration from? Because you made a map on Legos, and then a week later there's shading of bathymetry and the oceans of your maps, and then you take an old historical Nat Geo map and you recreate the colors and symbolic. Like, you just have a big ass atlas of maps. And you're like, I want to recreate this one, or like, how does your mind, like, it boggles my mind thinking about how you even came up with this damn idea. I'm like, holy cow, where did that come from? That's so cool.
Well, there's an endless mine of amazing ideas in atlases from the 1860s. I mean, I don't know what was in the air 150 years ago, but those atlases, the data visualizations that they did there were just bananas, bonkers. And many times I've thought of something and I've kind of made something in a digital environment and been like, yeah, this is great. I think this is, and then I see it in a dusty old atlas that's been scanned in from 150 years ago. I'm like, man, there is nothing new, but there's opportunity there too, to see what they've done and maybe try to, and then in another way to replicate that charming sense of like a tactile item. We work in internet protocols and bits and bytes that, you know, represent themselves as like a little glowing pixel on a computer screen. And there's like I get like an existential crisis just thinking about that, you know. Stuff that I worked on 10 years ago is long gone. It's just a 404 error. And it freaks me out. And there's something inviting about making a map that looks like it's actually existing on, well, there's something great about making something that you can actually print out and feel and hold and like John was here kind of thing. But there's like a nice, charming sense of approachability to a map that looks like you could reach out and touch it. And if you make something that somebody wants to reach out and touch, man, you're light years ahead of the other guys. You got a map that has stopped somebody in their tracks and they've stopped and take a closer second look. That's great. That's gold. That's the currency. Good design is the currency that buys a closer second look. But what's good design? You know, it could be something really minimalist and simple, which most of the time it ought to be if you're communicating data in a mission critical kind of thing. It's what's important is what you didn't show. You don't need an imagery based map. You don't need all these extra layers to. I feel like a lot of the times we GIS people are tempted to burden people with the knowledge of how complicated our jobs are. I've got so much data that I have to work with, and it's so important. I'm going to show all of it to you right now in this map. Boom. But there's strength in having a very narrow focus of theme for a map and showing just that content. And like you can cut through all that stuff and really communicate in a strong way. I work with, you know, great folks, Tommy Favel, you know, Warren Davison, Ken Field, Heather Smith, Sarah Bell. These people are really inspirational, and you get these ideas that kind of start bouncing off of each other. Right? It's impossible for maps not to start pouring out of that kind of thing. And out in the community, Daniel Huffman is really good at sharing in a kind of sage, generous manner all of his workflows, you know, taking things from a GIS into a completed cartographic product.
With you putting these articles out and or these MOOCs showing people how to do these cool tips and tricks and new ways. I mean, I often see people tag you on LinkedIn and be like, hey, look at my map. And, you know, does that inspire you too to know that you're helping lead the next generation and seeing other people's like their products and their maps and their outputs? And, you know,
It's the best
doing that. I mean,
it's the best, Michael. Oh, are you kidding me? It's insane. So people listening to this won't see, but I'm working in a little woodshed in my backyard in the middle of Michigan, and I'll make things and I'll send them out there. And I don't know if anybody's actually reading these things. You know, I have no idea.
Follow the
except when people say, hey, here's a map I made and I used this process. I'm like, yes, they read it and it worked. Something I worked on landed into the mind and the heart of somebody else and inspired them to try something, and it influenced the work that they did. That's so amazing.
Different continents, other side of the world.
I love that. Oh man, what a thrill. It is so cool. It's a huge honor anytime I see something like that. I love it. You mentioned the MOOC. So I didn't, I just got roped into the MOOC. The MOOC was the education and training team did a really great job. And Ken Field did all the thinking and planning and effort and coordination around the topics and things that we would talk about. I just got looped in and chatted with my buddy about maps and I wrote a few exercises, three map exercises now, I think, maybe 4. But yeah, I can't claim anything from the MOOC other than the fact that I showed up and wore the same shirt every day.
Going a little bit more on the maps, on average, when you're doing these articles, blogs, how much time do you invest to develop a high quality product output? And and I'm assuming a lot of this. I mean, you mentioned the art from your mother, and then going to college for that. I assume you got a lot of the artistic abilities from that. Like you draw the inspiration from that knowledge that you gained. But like, how much time on average does it take you to? You mentioned like 2.5 hours later you had this thing, but I'm guessing you spent a day or half a day putzing around with Pro and figuring it out.
Yeah, there's a lot. I don't want to oversell how like quick and easy the refinement process is, from idea to dabbling to dead ends to alternate ideas and then refinement and then actually producing the map. I mean, that can be a lot of time. And the way I work is often I've got like 6 things that I'm kind of chipping away at the same time. I've got a little whiteboard with a list of things that I might want to work on, like, oh, I could do this. And while something's rendering over here, I'll jump over and say, well, I'll look up this kind of data. And it's like juggling, I can't actually juggle, but I can juggle projects. And so it's hard for me to come up with like a general time frame for how long that takes, but it can be kind of a long time. But once I get something that I'm happy with, and then I take a step back and I think clearly about the processes for how to make that I can share with other people, that I could redo the map from start to finish in, sometimes in 20 minutes, sometimes in 20 minutes to a couple hours, once I've got that process down. And that's, I think, some of the value that I can offer to folks is like, man, it took me forever to prune this crazy branching tree of ideas and processes and come up with this workflow. But this workflow you can do in 20 minutes to 2 hours. So I hope it's helpful for folks in that regard. But yeah, it can be like a long meandering process for me. Some projects I'll kind of chip away at over many months, just come back to it, forget about it, see an image. Oh yeah, I could work on that. Some projects I'm just like, ooh, this is great. And I just sit down and kind of bang something out in a day or 2 days.
I wanted to chime in, John. This is Nathan. I've been waiting in the shadows.
Hi, Nathan.
No, I've been just kind of listening to you and Mike go back and forth. And I had a question on some of the points that you both brought up. And so you were talking about coming up with these ideas on map making and cartography and a lot of the things you put out there are just really cool, innovative ways to make maps and, of course, utilize the technology that's available to us in Pro that, used to take a long time and either ArcMap or, some sort of design software, Adobe type things.
Yeah.
What's been interesting is we've kind of tried to make some maps with some of that technology and some of the examples you've put out there. And I was curious to get your thoughts or opinions on, so you talked about sharing some of these creative ways with the next generation, people coming through school, young professionals. And what we've run into is we've taken some of those ideas and made some maps, and really cool looking maps that looks like they took, days and weeks to come up with. And we did it in a matter of hours in Pro. And we've given them to some different people, and they go, well, that's way too busy. That's way too fancy. I just want a simple map with a white background and black lines. And you kind of go, boy, that's boring. How do you, with all the resources we have today and all the cartography type products we can create, have you run into that or have thoughts on how we can get some of those old school thinkers to get past that? I just want a basic white map and look at what we can create for you. Do you have advice on how we can get people to come around and open their minds a little bit on map making?
Yeah. Well, maybe I do. I still, I think there's a lot of merit to somebody saying, well, just give me the simple version. You know, that's fancy and everything, but just give me the simple version. And that's important and that's valuable. And not every map needs to look like a pirate's map. That's, you know what I mean? That has tattered edges or is made out of Legos. That's fun. And to get the brain thinking about what you can do maybe and how you can alter that in a more practical sense, or just have fun with it, which is valid too. But like I was saying before, a simple, clear map, especially when you're communicating data, like an important theme that has to be actionable. Somebody wants to see it clear cut. And that's the right way to go, is clear cut. The thing I might push back on a little bit is things that don't matter, things that are just dogma, that, you give somebody a map and they're like, well, I need the layout to have boxes around everything. I need the north arrow to have its own box and sit in the bottom corner. And I need you to have a massive scale bar that takes up 20% of the paper in 18 different units. And everything is in its own like segregated unit on the page, just because that's like how I've always seen them. And that's what I'm expecting. So you're going to give that to me. This is weird. That kind of thing. I would push back on it. Like, well, okay, well, let's talk about north. Everybody can assume that north is going to be up. If I have a north arrow, it's because north isn't up, or I really need to drive home. And if it's a north arrow, it's going to be very small and minimal. If somebody's looking for it, they're going to find it, but it's not the first thing that their eyeball goes to. And the scale bar doesn't have to span the entire width of the map. It can be a very useful, very minimal utilitarian item with like a line in one number. This is 1 mile. And that's better. It's not just good enough. It's better than this ornate, elaborate north arrow or scale bar and, overly bordered things. That kind of thing I would push back on is dogmatic reflexes for people requesting a map. At the end of the day, if you pay for the band, you name the tune. If they want it that way, they get it that way. And if you really feel strongly about it, or hampered or hemmed in, make the version that you would want to make. Also, make both. If you've done the work of making the map, it's not a lot of effort to remove all of the layout outlines from everything, make the north arrow smaller, make the map fill the whole page. So you have more of like an engineering layout where the map is the whole page and you've got little elements on top of it as needed. That's just a few more minutes worth of work. You can give them the map they ask for, and then you can say, hey, by the way, here's one that, maybe you or the team might like in addition. I thought it was kind of interesting for the following reasons, that kind of thing.
I think it's an interesting balance, because you said earlier, us geography type people, we're creative. Our job is to make things, and it's tough having a non-GIS, non-cartographic type person telling you what to make. So, like you said, someone goes, well, I want this, this, and this, and that's how I want it. And I want this line red and I want this line blue. And you're going, but there's so many more possibilities we can do. And there's so many things we can do. Why are you limiting yourself to what we could create 20 years ago? Yeah. All right. But
yeah. Well, even aside from technology, is good, honest map making principles. So the biggest thing that I would imagine happens is a map is requested. I want you to show these 9 layers, and I want each one to have its own symbol type, different shape and different color. And so you've got this Lucky Charms map of, purple horseshoes and, red diamonds and way too many things. And then underneath that, I want this raster image with a green to yellow to red color scheme, or a rainbow color scheme. And you can have a really polite conversation about, well, red to green to yellow doesn't meet with accessibility standards. And, perhaps as a government agency, we need to think more carefully about making things readable to people with visual impairments. And I suggest this color scheme instead. Oh, okay. That's a conversation you can have. Another one is if you've got more than 7 discrete categories for something, the visual ability to discern between them is not just diminished, but it's obliterated, and you're not making an effective map anymore. You're not reducing the amount of data on the map. You're not just adding content. You're reducing a person's ability to take information out of that map. So some things you could say are, well, it doesn't need to be a different color and shape, because when somebody looks at something, they're going to assume that color means something and that shape means something. A lot of the times we'll have different colors and shapes because we can. Like, oh, they're going to be different. And this one's going to be orange and this one's going to be green, and they're going to be different shapes. Well, if you've got data driving color, that's one thing. If you've got data driving shape, that's another thing, two different. If you've got like a multivariate map, that's one thing. But if you don't, you can simplify it and just use shapes as the one visual dimension or color as the one visual dimension. And if they're asking you to put too many things, you could say, well, what's the focus of this map? Well, it's, sewer lines and the location of manhole covers. And they say, okay, here's a map with just the sewer lines and the location of manhole covers. Now here's a separate map with sewer lines and the location of, some other utility for context. And you can say 3 maps are actually a lot more effective than 1 map with everything on it. You can serialize that content. Now I've got 3 maps that all tell a specific story, and not like a map that says everything all at once, but doesn't really communicate very much. So there are strategies. But I think now I'm getting to what you're asking. Like, what if they're just asking you to do the wrong thing? A rainbow color scheme is, it's cool looking and it's kind of pretty, but it's inappropriate for intuiting visual data of scientific data. It's misinterpreted. You have errors of interpretation where you get a spike in the yellow and the spike in the cyan of that, and people think it's more important than it is. But if you have kind of a monochromatic, less to more color gradient, interpretation improves dramatically. So those are conversations that you could have, and you can actually show them, like, here's the rainbow version. All I'm looking at right now is that yellow band, but guess what? It doesn't mean anything. And then you show them a map with like a good monochromatic color scheme or a viridis color scheme that's scientifically shown to show less to more effectively. And then they'll say, oh, that's cool, good, I don't want to misinterpret data.
So talking about maps, what's one of your favorite maps out there? You have to have a favorite. I know, don't tell me there's a whole handful from the 1860s. What is one map you're like, that is a phenomenal map?
I a while ago I actually wrote a blog post about it. There was this really, sometimes I'll look on Etsy. If you look up vintage map on Etsy, you can see some really cool and inspiring examples of maps that people have done 70 years ago, 100 years ago, 150 years ago. And people are tearing them out of atlases and selling them to you for $8. And there was this very simple map, and it was, one page in an atlas that would have had hundreds of pages. And I think it was for an insurance company just mapping the locations of homes. And it was in France. But it was like, to me, the peak of somebody who had mastered a craft of communicating something very simply and showing only what was important and doing it effectively. And they only had one color ink pass. It wasn't multicolored. They have just one color. It's a monochrome map. And it would have been etched into a copper plate and then pressed into paper. So the resolution isn't all that great, but the amount of data that it communicated was just insane and beautiful. And I don't remember the name of the series of maps, but it was a European map maker from, about 100 years ago. And the one I saw happened to be this village on the coast of France. So you could see where they had marked tidal areas, the location of houses, buildings, roads, sidewalks, just an insane amount of information, perfectly crafted and communicated. Just an amazing map. I love that map.
I'm gonna have to go look up your blog and see that. I'm sure I read
I'll
it.
send you. Yeah, I'll send you a link. Maybe you can share the link.
All right, 10-4. Obviously you do a lot of speaking. What's one of your favorite public speaking engagements that you've done or participated in, and why? And kind of second question on that is, what is one of your proudest achievements personally?
I love. So I've mentioned NACIS, the NACIS conference. It's a cartographic conference, but like any map person would feel right at home there. And you'll find that they're talking about the same kinds of things that I wrestle with. I thought I was the only one who had to deal with that kind of thing. I love that conference. And that's my favorite one to speak at. And it's my favorite one to listen at. If you have a conference where you're really interested in a lot of the topics and what people have to say, you should consider speaking at it. And you might think, I'm too nervous. Nobody cares. You get that imposter syndrome, which I feel all the time in spades, just loads of it. You just kind of muscle through it and say, I'm going to do it anyway and see what goes. And people, you've got important things to share, interesting insights, because it's, you're the one dealing with it. And there's only one version of you, and people can learn from that version of a human. You've got lots to share. So I'd encourage folks to present, but NACIS is my favorite conference to present at.
Shocker, to the UC.
Yeah, well, the UC, man, it's its own universe. I actually wasn't even thinking about it right now when you asked about conferences, which is funny because it's this weird thing where I'm like doing a presentation and then running across this venue, a half mile away to get to some other place just in time to plug in the laptop and make sure it works. Okay, good. It's projecting, and then do another talk before I'm still out of breath from running over it. That's just insanity. It's so much fun. It's simultaneously an energy suck and energizing because you get to meet people who are using the GIS tools, and that's just like a battery charging for the whole year. And I missed that in the last 2 years. I missed it a lot. But like at the end of it, I could slip into a coma, but I'm also so amped up and full of ideas and encouragement from other map makers out there. It's this weird, ironic, glorious manifestation of map goodness. A talk that like sticks out to me is the first keynote I ever gave. Holy smokes, was that scary? I was terrified. It was for it was 2017. I'm looking at a baseball bat that they gave me, the Galt House, for Kentucky area map professionals. I want to say it was Kentucky area, and it was in Louisville. You're supposed to say Louisville. You just let your mouth hang. Louisville. It was in Louisville, and it was like they took a chance on me. They reached out and said, "Hey, would you want?" And I just couldn't believe it when I got that email. I was like, "Keynote? No way! That's insane." Yes, I'll do it. Yes, I'll do it. And man, was that scary. I took my son with me because it was his birthday the next day. And so we got to do some fun things together. He got to see me do that. He didn't care, but that was a lot of fun. Terrifying once you get that first one out of in a lot of ways, keynotes are easier than a regular conference presentation because the only job of a keynote is to whip up unbridled enthusiasm about the theme of the conference, which in my case is always map making or data visualization. And that's what's easier than getting map people excited about maps. Come on. So that's a lot of fun. Those are the most fun presentations.
So you're signing up to be a MiCAMP keynote one of these years, right?
MiCAMP has way, way higher standards than that, Michael. The most proud, so I'll tell you the most proud I've ever been was I show up to work at my old company, and a manager comes out of his office and goes, "John, you're on NPR. My wife just called me." I was like, "What are you talking about?" So I look up npr.org or something, and there was this series that a guy named Robert Krawlwich wrote. And Robert Krawlwich is a science journalist, and he had a podcast called Radio Lab, and I was a huge fan of Radio Lab and Robert Krawlwich. I really appreciated his practical perspective on very minutely specific scientific things that had big societal or emotional or spiritual implications. He's just this wonderful thinker. And he had written a blog post about a dumb animated GIF that I had made, which showed the 12 cloud-free satellite mosaics of Earth just stitched together into a global perspective looking straight down. So, and it just went boom, 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 boom. And you could see the seasons change on Earth. But because it was projected into a spherical projection, it looked like a thing. And I gave it a fake atmosphere and I desaturated it a little bit. And I just hit run and I played, and it would loop, this progression of snow coming down, starting on the mountains and reaching down into the valleys, and it would come from the north and crawl over Michigan, encasing Michigan, and just almost like nothing, it would creep back. And it was this lovely kind of thing to just stare at. I got lost in staring at it. And so I was like, well, this is cool. And I just threw it up on the blog, and that was that. And then Robert Krawlwich wrote a blog post about it. And I'm reading it, and my ears like get really hot. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is happening. Robert Krawlwich, I couldn't believe it. That was an honor, such a thrill. So that was like, I'm most proud of that.
So over the last 15, 20 years, but really more so in the really last 5 years with the growth of AGO and everything, technology has changed a lot. How has it changed with how you've done your job, and where do you see things kind of evolving to? Because 5-10 years ago, you wouldn't even think about story maps or all the cool things that you're doing right now, and obviously the tools are going to keep growing and growing. But what's the next frontier? Where do you see things moving?
I don't know. I really suck at predicting the future, and I don't spend much time thinking about it. And maybe I should, because I'll just get left behind. It's a weird perspective. If I look back 20 years, I was making interactive maps in Flash and I couldn't code, and I can't do that now. And so I don't feel this kind of scary sense that, man, the world is moving so fast, and I've got to keep taking all these courses. And it sounds like I'm saying, don't keep your edge and don't keep learning. Always keep learning, but maybe learn accidentally as you go, or see free courses and do it, or watch YouTube videos. I don't know about like the future, what's next. I'm not a good guy to ask about what's next, I guess. So that's a really unsatisfying answer. But maybe somebody will find comfort in it. Like, I don't know either. Who knows what's next? Maybe.
All right. Well, my next question, you're probably going to punt on as well, but what new innovative technologies do you get most excited about? Is it advancement in drone and LiDAR, or indoor mapping, or scanning, or?
That's all cool and exciting. And I like seeing the results of it. I like seeing what you share, Michael, on LinkedIn, because you're always sharing these really cool examples of augmented reality and drones, and you and your firm are doing really exciting things with that. And I find it intimidating, frankly. When I see that, I'm like, man, that is cool. I kind of wish I knew how to do any of that. And so already I'm feeling that sense of like, man, this is the future, and I'm not in the future. But I like the little things. I get excited about little things like the ability to have variable transparency in a color gradient, in ArcGIS Pro. You couldn't do that in ArcMap. But now in Pro, I can have an elevation model that goes from transparent white to opaque white. And all of a sudden it looks like mist. I'm like, geez, this is amazing. And all it needed was that ability to have a gradient within the symbology of a vector or raster layer, instead of just being able to set transparency to the layer wholesale, which is boring. Cool, but boring. Little nerdy little tidbits like that get me excited. Maps for Adobe, like when they added an export option from Pro, like, oh, now I can export something, an AIX file that I can open in Illustrator, and Illustrator will remember all of my layer names and hierarchy and the organization, and it keeps my text pristine. That's great. I love it. Little nerdy things, tidbits like that. Not big picture stuff, but in a lot of ways, I think the big picture really is just inching forward with improvements that unlock people's ideas, and a lot of cool map things start shaking out of that.
Can you talk about kind of moving forward, kind of talking to the future generations and the youth coming into the GIS space and world? Who is somebody that, inspired or mentored you while you were either in school or professional career? They're like, man, thank you. Like, that's why I want to keep doing this myself. Like, is there a professor that really drawn you in, or is it back to your mother with the art and going into Central and figuring that out? Or is there somebody you work with now that you're like, they're just a great mentor or a person, inspiration to me?
Yeah, it's such a tough question because that's all I am, is the energy and love and investment that people have poured into me graciously and selflessly. That's what I am. It's that's the only reason I can do anything that I can do, or have learned anything that I've learned, is the patient encouragement of those people when I didn't know what I was doing, and I still don't know what I'm doing about a lot of stuff, and I have to reach out and ask for help for folks, and they're really gracious with their time. And I remember that. I remember not knowing how to do a thing maybe that I'm very familiar with now, but like how foreign it seemed and how scary it was to try to work through that process and be afraid I was going to get something wrong in the middle of a long chain of steps. And I try to remember that when helping folks who reach out with a question. But that's all I am, is all that effort and love and patience and gracefulness that was poured in. Yeah, like, I mean, you mentioned my mom. Of course, I mean, whose mom isn't, and my dad. I took every one but one of my father's courses at Central. That was fantastic. The professors at Central were really wonderful. I mean, David Patton was such a great patient mentor and a practical person. In academia, you want to find the person who's just really practical and can speak plainly to you. And that was David Patton. Amy Lobin pushed me. She saw like a little thing I was working on for fun and said, you should submit this to a competition. I was like, why would anybody? Like, okay, I guess I don't even know about a competition. And so she was so encouraging from that perspective, and tricked me into thinking bigger about sharing content that I was working on with other people. Ben Lee was an amazing GIS, is an amazing GIS professor at Central Michigan University. So much patience teaching a kid who didn't have a computer and had to ask how to turn the computer on the first time. I mean, goodness, I can't even imagine how much patience he had to have. Yeah, great professor. People, and even Malcolm Fox. Malcolm Fox ran the water department at Mount Pleasant. I don't know if he still does, but I mean, he took me in as a part-timer and said, yeah, go out and GPS all these service poles. And after you come in and you upload the data, you can goof around making us maps if you want, John. And he was like, yeah, do it. And he gave me that latitude. And I was like, really? Okay, I'll do that. And I made something for the water department, and they put it up on their website, like this tour of the water plant, like an interactive animated tour of the water plant, Macromedia Flash. So Malcolm Fox invested into me. Yeah, our parents invested as professors, but also colleagues that we have to lean on, more experienced colleagues. That's all I do all day, is reach out to people on Teams and chat with them. Hey, Ken, what do you think about this? Hey, Heather, how do you like this design? Could it be better? Or, Diana Lavery, do you have any interesting demographic or economic data that I could use for this map? I've got a map idea. I just need some data to pour into it. And she's like, yeah. And she'll patiently explain to me all the nuances of the data. And then it ends up changing how I was imagining representing it. Developers, Jinan Zhang, who I work with and collaborate with frequently. He's a full stack developer. And I mean, talk about patience. He's working with a guy who's like, I've got this map and here's some data and here's an idea. And I'll kind of wave my hands around and maybe give him a sketch. And then he makes it happen. I mean, amazing patience and insight and collaboration. So yeah, I mean, none of us are just doing this by themselves. And I'm aware that a lot of the blog posts I'll write, they have my name on it. It's the byline, or the maps I make have my name on it. But really, it's all those people that we work with and that support us and that allow us to do this in the jobs that we have, and all the people that invested in us in our education. It's they should have their names on there too.
For the new aspiring GIS professionals, whether they're high school students learning GIS or college students or recent graduates, what's a couple pieces of advice that you would give these young professional members and students? And I know you've already mentioned a few things here, but what are some key points that you'd like to get across?
Yeah, we did hit on this a little bit earlier, kind of accidentally, but it was fun, is to try to use your GIS and mapping skills in a project that you weren't asked to do. So look for opportunities to make a map that isn't kind of spoon-fed to you. Ask a colleague for some data. Oh, I noticed you gave a presentation with an Excel file that had some township names in it. If you give that to me, I can make a map for you. Or just let me see that. I want to try something. Okay. And you give them a map and their brains will explode. What? So look for opportunities to apply your skills for projects that you weren't asked to do. And I guarantee you're going to become a rock star. You're going to make more money and you're going to have more fun and you're going to have more opportunities and your ideas are going to turn into more ideas and you'll be the go-to person. You'll be known as the person who's got cool ideas and a whiz. Oh, they're the map whiz. And really, it could be just the easiest thing in the world. They just haven't ever seen their data on a map before. Maps are magical in that way. People just assume it's so difficult and hard and impossible. They don't even think about putting their data on a map. And if you come up and ask them, hey, let me see that data, make a map for them, boom, that's big time. So that's a recommendation. And it's so easy to do. And frankly, it's a lot of fun. So I don't know why you wouldn't do it.
Kind of closing in here, John, can you give your social media handles or link to your website so people can go check it out and link up with you if they're not?
Actually, that's all private, Michael. And I'm kind of offended that you asked me to do that.
Oh, I mean, your Twitter.
Long, awkward pause.
LinkedIn. Come on, Meow.
Yeah. I've got my own personal blog is adventuresinmapping.com. Thanks for this opportunity to plug, by the way, Michael. I appreciate it. And I'm pretty active on Twitter. It's John_M_Nelson, which sucks, but John M. Nelson was taken. John Nelson was taken. John was taken. Jay was taken. You get what you can get. I'm on Instagram now. The kids are on Instagram. And if I'm on Instagram, then its days are numbered, but I'm there. You can.
Come on, you're about to get to your TikTok here. Come on now.
Is Yik Yak still a thing? So I'm on Instagram. I think it's John M. Nelson without the underscores because that was available. For crying out loud, I should have been consistent, but I wasn't. Man, what would I tell myself if I could go back in time? Oh, but dude, YouTube. So John Nelson Maps is my YouTube channel, or just Google John Nelson and YouTube and maps and that kind of thing. You'll find it. That's where I'll put stuff. So yeah,
usually link those videos into your blogs. And you post
it's kind of a neat, weird ecosystem where I've started pulling the videos into the blog, and then I'll give like a hit list of the topics that I'll hit with extra links and some more explanation and that kind of thing, an intro and a closing. So it's nice how that all works together.
All right. Well, thanks, John, for doing this MiCAMP podcast.
Thanks for asking me, Michael and Nathan. Of course. And thanks for everybody. Thank you for listening, MiCAMP folks.
Hopefully we'll see you at the conference next year or the year after that.
I need to get there. Shame on me for not getting there yet. I'll get there. I heard it's a lot of fun. I heard it's good people.
Yeah. Well, thanks for all you do. And thanks for, you've spoken at a lot of, GIS Day conferences and local events for colleges and other students. So that's awesome. Keep doing that and we'll see you around.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, everybody.